So we're ready to go?
Yep.
Good evening, everyone. I see that we have 14 attendees to this meeting. My name is Bob Murdoch. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Elk Grove. Tonight's meeting is on the Modena Way neighborhood and a small cell site that's going to be proposed to be located adjacent to Modena Way. This meeting is being held in response to a petition from residents of Modena Way that the city received in May of 2020. The petition noted concerns with a small cell site adjacent to Modena Way on Powerade Road. This meeting is scheduled for 2 hours and will end no later than 9 p.m. This meeting is being recorded and a copy will be posted to the city's small cell website. Participants are muted unless called upon and unmuted by the host. That's Jeff Werner and myself. Participants will not be able to share their screens. At any time during the meeting, participants may submit written questions using the Q&A chat feature within the Zoom browser. Written questions will be responded to in the order they are received. Once written questions have been responded to, time permitting, the city will take oral questions. Participants can raise their hand virtually in the Zoom browser. Participants who raise their hand will be called upon in the order received. You may continue to submit written questions during the oral Q&A. Due to the virtual meeting format, written questions are highly encouraged. City staff will do what we can to answer questions to the best of our ability during the time allowed. Please be mindful of others and help ensure everyone has an opportunity to ask questions. With me is Jeff Werner. He's going to provide a brief PowerPoint presentation and then we'll start answering questions. Jeff is an engineering services manager. He's in charge of a number of things, including the Public Works permitting process, which includes permitting for small cell sites. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff. Excuse me, Jeff, to go ahead and provide a brief presentation.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for that, Bob. I'm getting a couple of messages here with some people saying they cannot join via video. So I just want to do a brief check to make sure that everyone can see the screen. Again, everyone's muted. So if Ms. Saturn, can you please respond in the chat whether or not your problems have been resolved? I know the meeting began with a couple of technical difficulties on our end, so not everyone was able to get in right away. But I just want to confirm if you could type in the chat whether or not you're in, or I can actually, you know what? Let me see if I can enable your microphone at this point. So can you clarify what you mean by trying to join via video? Your video will be disabled for the duration of the meeting. We can see you, Mr. Graham, but your microphone will be muted for the duration of the meeting unless called upon. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. So as Bob mentioned, this meeting is for the city to address concerns for Modena Way residents. We received a petition on May 12th of 2020 citing concerns with a location of a small cell site on Powerade Road. The meeting objectives for tonight are to provide information to concerned residents regarding small cell technology, federal requirements, and the city's small cell regulations and permitting process. Provide information and status update related to individual site permit application 19-07227, and listen to resident concerns and answer questions regarding that same application. The agenda is here for you to see. This agenda follows closely to what you will find on the city's small cell webpage. We've put a lot of information. A lot of that was in response to the letter and the petition that we received from Ms. Saturn and the other residents of Modena Way. And again, we'll start with small cell technology, go through the federal requirements, local policy and regulations. We'll discuss installation of small cell equipment on city-owned facilities and discuss the city's permitting requirements, and then give you a status update on the ISP application 19-07227. And then after that, we'll respond to written questions, and if time allows, open it up to oral questions. So first, what is a small cell? So a small cell is a smaller version of the traditional cellular telecommunication antennas or radios. They're much smaller than what you're used to seeing as in the form of large towers with with many perhaps satellite dishes or other antennas or radios. They may be installed on light poles, buildings, or small power or telephone poles, and they can operate with either the current 4G technology or the newer 5G technology. Just to illustrate that, we've included a few photos here. On the left is an example of a small cell location. It's a rendering of what the antenna might look like at the top of a streetlight pole. There's also the small radios near the bottom of the pole. On the right are your more traditional large cell sites, or the larger arrays with many antennas or satellite dishes. And then many of you may have or be familiar with the tree version. They've attempted to camouflage these antennas, and it allows them for aesthetic purposes to be installed in more residential settings as opposed to the more rural settings you're used to seeing the large towers. The Federal Communications Commission is the division that regulates the deployment of small cells. FCC Order 18-133, often referred to as the 5G deployment order, is intended to streamline the rollout of advanced 4G and 5G services nationwide, and it places some limits regulatory authority for cities and other municipalities with regards to what we can regulate for the deployment of small cell. The restrictions on the city's regulatory authority include not allowing the city to prohibit or materially inhibit cellular service. You cannot regulate the placement or construction based on health effects of radio frequency or RF emissions. However, RF emissions must comply with limits set by the FCC. A wireless carrier is not required to show a gap in coverage in an area to install a small cell or other antenna. And the city could be found in violation of this order if the city unduly restricts the carrier's ability to install a small cell or otherwise densify their network. Even though there are many restrictions placed in the FCC order, the city does have some limited ability to regulate the deployment of small cell. Most of that is related to structural and aesthetics. The local policies and regulations that do regulate the deployment of small cell in the city are included in the Elk Grove Municipal Code, Title 23, which is referred to as our zoning code. On September 11, 2019, the city council adopted an amendment to the zoning code to establish the land use criteria and required entitlements for the deployment of small cell. Table 23.27-1 is really the meat of that, where it shows you the various land uses and what the various entitlements are for each of those land uses. For example, if you find the small cell or cellular communications site, and you look at the table and you go to the commercial land use, you will find that that would require a minor use permit for somebody who is looking to deploy or install a small cell in a commercial or a residential area. Additional restrictions: no small cell shall be placed within 500 feet of another small cell, and no small cell facility shall be located immediately adjacent to or immediately across the street from a front yard of any residential dwelling. And that's a pretty important distinction. The city council actually made it clear that they wanted these things away from front yards, but didn't really specify with regards to any backyards or other things. So it's the front yard that's of primary concern. And I did skip a bullet there. So the small cell facilities in non-industrial zoning districts, and again, that's the residential and commercial districts, would require a conditional use permit or a minor conditional use permit. What that means, however, is that in an industrial zone, those are by right uses. So there is no use permit requirement or other entitlement required for deployment of a small cell in an industrial zone. The other caveat to these regulations and what's required by the zoning code is that small cell facilities consistent with a master license agreement between the applicant and the city shall be a permitted use. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail here with this slide. So what is an MLA, or a master license agreement? The master license agreement essentially allows carriers to install small cell equipment on city-owned facilities. It's an agreement between the city and the carrier that establishes the requirements for the installation of small cells on city-owned facilities or municipal facilities in the public right-of-way. Right now, the only city facility or municipal facility that small cells are allowed to be installed on is a streetlight, a city streetlight. And there are only a certain few types of streetlights where these are allowed. They're have been considered for aesthetic and structural purposes, and the city council has adopted the MLAs with those streetlights identified. Any additional facilities or streetlights would require an amendment to the MLA. Again, we have aesthetic and structural considerations. The MLAs also consider the power and electrical connections. In other words, we need to make sure that the carrier can obtain power properly and can pay for their own power through SMUD. And finally, the MLAs establish the fees that the carriers are required to pay for the processing the agreement, as well as having the facilities deployed on the city-owned equipment. Locations and streetlights identified in the master license agreement are approved small cell sites. So again, these agreements have gone through the city council. These locations have been considered and they are considered approved, provided they meet the requirements of the MLA. And that includes meeting all applicable laws with regards to RF emissions and other requirements. Locations and streetlights not identified in the master license agreement at the time of city council approval must be added in the manner defined in the MLA and must conform to the zoning code. An example of that would be for a new location in a residential district, a carrier must obtain a minor conditional use permit before being added to the MLA by the city manager. And I also want to point out that, a small cell device could go on a private facility. Again, the master license agreement is only an agreement that covers public facilities or municipal facilities in the public right-of-way. So a private facility could go in a commercial area under a conditional use permit if a private landowner made an agreement separately with the telecommunications provider. There are also some permit requirements for our licensees with the master license agreement. So first of all, an individual site permit is a new type of permit here at the city that was created for the deployment of small cells on city equipment. The individual site permit ensures conformance with the MLA and confirms available power supply. So this is a very limited review. The individual site permit application comes into the city, staff reviews it to make sure that the street light is the correct street light and that the carrier is able to obtain power and that they're going to be in compliance with all the FCC rules regarding RF emissions and other requirements. The second step is an encroachment permit. So once the individual site permit is approved, that essentially verifies that these locations are consistent with the MLA and they're going to conform to applicable laws. And an encroachment permit would allow the physical work to be performed in the public right-of-way. It provides the city with another opportunity, or the first opportunity, to review traffic control plans, final electrical connections, and streetlight pole structural capacity. This would be similar to any work within the city right-of-way. We always look at these things, and an encroachment permit is required anytime you trench in a city street or otherwise perform work in the city's right-of-way. The status of the individual site permit application 19-07227, which, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but the location that's in question on Power and Road adjacent to Modena Way is included in that individual site permit application. The application was first received on December 13th, 2019. It included 5 locations, and all of them were pre-approved within the master license agreement between the city and AT&T. The current status of that application, however, is that it is denied because due to incomplete bonds and insurance requirements. AT&T has not provided insurance in compliance with the MLA at this time. So we're working through that with them and waiting for a resubmittal. Once the application is complete and they're in compliance with the MLA, the city has 45 days to review and approve the application or otherwise deem it incomplete. The one thing I can share as well is that AT&T has informed us that they're not expecting construction on any of their approved locations until at least 2021. And that does conclude my presentation, and with that, we can move into written questions and comments.
And Jeff, can you go back just to the rendering so everybody
Sure.
kind of understands what we're talking about? So we are talking about the installation there on the far left, the small cell. So it is, that's one of our standard Cobra head street lights you see around town. So it integrates reasonably well. You're seeing this type of installation really all over California and all over the country along the lines of, that's why they want to use the street lights. They figured out that works reasonably well for them. So let's see what questions. We only have one question right now that's open. It says, well, this is from Mr. Graham. Will I be able to see other people on the call? I'm not sure. I mean, if you can see them, I mean, we can see them as the host. I'm not sure if others can as well.
There may be an option for you to click on the participants tab. I'm not sure whether or not you can see that as just a participant, but if not,
we certainly can provide that after this is over as to who participated. Right now we have 25 participants shown. Okay, so the next one is identified as Omar. Does the city have any leeway in where these small cells be placed? So if local residents have concerns about placement of the cells near the neighborhood school, can they request they be moved elsewhere? With respect to the ones in the master license agreement, those locations are approved. We have talked to the carriers like AT&T. In some instances, they might be willing to relocate. It really depends on the situation. I think because this is new, relatively new, there aren't any in town yet, and so there are a lot of options for them. It's something we certainly could talk to the carriers about if there are specific concerns. Let me see. The next one is from Ms. Saturn. It says, Mr. Werner, I would like to thank you for arranging this meeting. However, it is very discouraging and concerning as I patiently waited over 2 months for this meeting to take place, and you confirmed and notified just me at 5:45 p.m. Thursday night, which is barely 2 business days before tonight's meeting. You indicated in your July 20th letter that the date and time were tentative, but you never formally notified any other resident with the Zoom registration link. You placed the responsibility in my lap. I checked the small cell antenna website, and there is not one piece of information about tonight's meeting. Again, transparency remains an issue with the city regarding this matter. I'm not the city, nor do I work for the city. I am a constituent of the city. I'm not responsible for the lives of Elk Grove residents. That is the civic duty and responsibility of the city. June 26th, Ms. Haggard's last email to me said my public information request would be completed by July 31st. It's August 3rd when I submitted my PRA request. They have not been fulfilled. Therefore, I ask you and the city to extend the date of this meeting to mid-October so that I could be allowed ample time to review documents to be received. And the public information request is August 10th. And to date, nearly 2 months later, I still haven't received the update from Ms. Haggard. Well, I apologize for that, for all the information not being provided yet. I would say, having the meeting tonight doesn't preclude us from having another meeting in October. We certainly can do that. The issue is we did reach out to everyone that expressed concerns in the petition that we received. We scheduled this meeting specifically at your request. You wanted a meeting, I think, after later in June, and by the time we got everything arranged, this was the time that seemed to work out best. We did send notice to those residents on Medina Way that had signed the petition. So we did let them know that the meeting date and time. Apologize if you didn't think that was sufficient. But again, if another meeting needs to be held at some point in the future, we certainly can do that. Mr. Graham says, I cannot see them now. I guess that he's referring to participants. Okay, we certainly can, excuse me, provide a list of participants after the meeting. Just to answer your question as well about recording, yes, I did say in the intro that this meeting is being recorded. and that information will be placed on the city small cell webpage. We can also provide you with a list of participants that we have. Let me see. Next one is from Mr. Danaher. Says the email invite to this meeting suggests emailing questions. Do you have those questions in front of you, or should we check our outboxes for what we sent? I do have your email, Mr. Danaher, and let me see here. You had 3 questions. One was payment or compensation for school districts. Now, as a lead-in to this, you make reference to I think cell towers. I think we need to be very clear that, and there were a couple other questions we received regarding cell towers. A cell tower is the image you see here in the center. That is not being proposed. What's being proposed is what's on the far left, which is some additional equipment on the city's existing street light poles. So first is payment or compensation for the school district. First of all will the school get paid compensation for letting the network providers build a tower on their property? I think that the school district should be paid, and it should be done in the form of consistent payments for as long as the tower operates. Okay, again, they're not building towers. Second, none of this equipment is going on school property. It is going actually in the city right of way, in the street right of way. So there's no real tie to making payments to the school district because they're not using their property or their equipment. Next one was, won't increasing mobile data speeds only make it easier for students to use their phones as distractions during school? I question the benefit of increasing internet speed on mobile devices at a school where students should not be distracted on their phones anyway. Well, I mean, the additional equipment is there to provide, I guess, additional capabilities or bandwidth for everybody throughout the city. I mean, it's being placed near residential neighborhoods, schools, commercial sites, industrial sites. So it's not really necessarily targeted at schools. It just happens to be adjacent to a few schools. And really, if there's an issue with distracting students, I mean, I guess I look at that as, that's an issue between the student, the parent, and the school. I don't think we're not in a place where we could limit, because of FCC regulations, the capabilities of the cell towers. Next question about the concerns of possible harms. And this is really more of a statement. It says, I want to make a point about the claims of potential harm from radiation from the antennas. People are fearful because it is an unknown thing that cannot be seen, and from the public's perspective is poorly understood. I understand that a new thing that we don't understand can be scary, but that is no reason to freak out about it. The fear-mongering should not be part of the decision process. As someone else has pointed out in discussions online, South Korea has millions of users on 5G with no apparent detriments or side effects. 4G has been around for a while, and we also have not found harm from that. Please do not be swayed by the unfounded claims of people who are simply afraid of something they don't understand, okay? And that was the last of the email from Mr. Danaher. Okay, so what's the next one? Next one is from Mackenzie Weezer. Hello, Bob and staff. This is Planning Commission Mackenzie Weezer. Will these towers be coming to Planning Commission on a one-by-one basis?
So the only ones that'll go to the ones that are included in the MLA, Commissioner Weezer, are require no additional entitlements. So I don't imagine those will be coming to the Planning Commission anymore. And then only new ones that require a CUP, I believe, would come before the commission because MUPs are heard by the zoning administrator.
Okay. Layla, August, can you see me? No, but we certainly can see the questions that you type into the Q&A. So there's Lana Shearer. Let's see, wait a second. So how close is the proposed facility from the nearest residence? Regardless of front yard, how close is the facility from the nearest high school classroom or playground? this should be noted on the plans, is an RF study required as part of the application process, and had one been obtained? Okay, so we did take a look at the one on power in that really sparked the request for this meeting. I think the nearest house is structure is a little over 100 feet away from that, and from that same cell tower or that same street light, I believe it's a couple hundred feet away from the nearest building. Whether that's a classroom or offices, I'm not completely sure, but that would be the closest structure from that. So I think those are roughly the estimated distances. Is there an RF study required as part of the application? No, what the applicant has to do is comply with all FCC regulations about RF emissions, and they provide a certification as part of the process that they are in compliance with all FCC regulations on the equipment that's being used.
So it actually is an RF study or an RF report. They get information from the carrier on the antennas and the emissions from that antenna, and they hire a third party to prepare the report. We do require an RF report or certification for each and every one of these locations that are going to go on a city facility. And those are, again, certified by an individual trained in RF safety and also reviewed and approved by a registered California electrical engineer.
Okay, the next one is from Janet Young. It says, what testing has been done to ensure safety to children, as in depressed cell growth, especially since towers have been approved near 2 schools? Again, the federal government has basically reviewed and dealt with that issue of health concerns. They do not allow the local governments to regulate based on any health issues. The FCC has determined that that cell sites operated within FCC regulations are not an issue as far as health concerns. And basically, as a city, we don't have the ability to do anything other than that. And so, I guess that's the simplest answer I can provide. Another question from Ms. Saturn. Would like to reiterate my August 3rd letter to the city when I referenced the special city council meeting community workshop that was held on November 28, 2018. Council member Detrick made a statement about priorities, uncertainty, and protecting residents from electromagnetic radiation when the full extent of the health hazards are not known. His concerns about protecting residents, that you don't really know the effects until 5, 10, 20 years later. It was or at least I thought it was a heartfelt message to Elk Grove-ians. Councilmember Soon also implied that the city must be transparent in its process, but the city has not been transparent at all. If something as crucial as this issue were to affect you and your family, would you not expect your city leaders to notify you directly? I sure did. The city has notified me directly of other projects which had direct impact on us, but why not this? This is a health hazard and dangerous. Okay, sorry you have that perspective. Again, we don't have the ability to regulate based on health. I know I'm sure if you go to the internet, you can find studies and concerns about cell technology, but again, the FCC regulations govern that, and we as a city do not have the ability to regulate based on environmental impacts, which includes health concerns. Lynn Wheat, I have a concern about the location in neighborhoods as my light poles are on corners and not the front yards of homes. This would still expose neighbors to the small cells. Okay, I don't know if you have a specific location in mind that we could look at. Perhaps we could speak offline maybe tomorrow about a specific location to see if it's in one of the approved locations in the master license agreement. Again, if it's not in the master license agreement, it does have to go through a separate process for approval. So I'd have to see a specific location that you're talking about.
I have a comment
Go
to
ahead.
make on that as well. Hi, Lynn. So I know you're familiar with many of our streetlights throughout the city. I just want to add that the only two types of poles that are approved for a small cell are Cobra heads and one of the Laguna Ridge, more fancier type of Cobra head. And those are typically only on arterials and collector roads. So none of the old county standard 1B poles have been approved for deployment with a small cell. And I know from a structural perspective, they might have some challenges doing that. So, they may be working on that, but we certainly don't have any of those approved now. So I hope that helps address your concern a little bit more. And also, new locations, again, would go through the review process of either the planning commissioner or the zoning administrator, depending on the type of entitlement required.
Yeah, and it was interesting during the master license agreement development. We have about 12 or 13 different types of streetlight poles in Elk Grove. I mean, the Cobra head that you see on your screen on the far left is the most common. You'll see those again, as Jeff said, along a lot of arterials. We have a lot of different kind of streetlight poles in town. And what we told the carriers were, you have to show us a rendering, and it has to be approved by the city council before you can propose any sites on a particular type of pole. And as Jeff said, of the 12 or 13 different types of poles that we have in town, they've only proposed 2 types of poles. And so the only way they could install them on another type of pole is they'd actually have to go back to the city council and ask for an amendment to the master licensing agreement to use another type of pole. And they would have to provide a computer rendering, as you see here, so that the council could look at it from an aesthetic standpoint to see if it's something that is acceptable. So just hopefully that provides a little bit more information about that. Lana Shear, let me see. As part of the pre-approved sites for the MLA, was there a public meeting before approving these locations to consider the above questions? There was a meeting at the city council when the master license agreements were approved. They were noticed as part of the normal process of noticing a city council meeting. There was no specific notice sent out to anyone and adjacent to the sites. Is that during that time, it was, I guess, looked at as, well, it's a master license agreement. It could affect, it could affect streetlight poles throughout the city. It is noticed in the city council's agenda, and if people are interested, they would read the information that was online. Let me see. Young, what testing has been done to ensure safety to animals, especially bees and birds affected by low-level non-ionizing microwave radiation? Again, that's a question about health impacts, and the FCC has actually decided that the health impacts are at an acceptable level, and the city doesn't have the ability to regulate based on environmental impacts, including health. Linui, can this be changed in the ordinance to include side yards? How come this wasn't considered? I think when the city council was considering it, they looked at, I think, the issue of if you came out your front door, they didn't want residents to be able to see this, although the street light, it's not significantly different than, say, a normal street light, but that was the concern expressed at the city council meeting. And so they asked us to look at, well, what would happen if you said side yards or backyards? So it was more than anything else, it was an aesthetic issue that was being discussed by the city council as to, they wanted residents not to have to look at it when they come out their front door. I guess at that time they considered the side yards and backyards less intrusive from an aesthetic standpoint. Okay, next question. Statement from Ms. Saturn. As of today, the city still does not have a better idea on the health hazards of long-term EMF exposure. Therefore, the city should follow the direction from the council members' DETRIC statement, minimizing our exposure and maximize local control over the permitting process. There are several options available to the city to do this. Also, an ISP should not be considered an automatic approval because the applicant must comply with Elk Grove Municipal Code Title 23, Chapter 94. Mr. Hobbs, that is the city attorney, Mr. Hobbs, Why will the city not make an amendment? Okay, just so everybody knows, Mr. Hobbs is not on this meeting. We certainly can pass along the question. Why will the city not make an amendment to the Elk Grove Municipal Code and implement more rigorous regulations? The Elk Grove Municipal Code currently prohibits cell antennas immediately adjacent to or across the street from a residential front yard, and that it requires at least 500 feet between two cell antennas. This city should amend its municipal code by prohibiting placement of these health hazards equipment in all residential and school zones. Why will the city not do this to protect the residents and our future children? Again, the city does not have the ability to regulate based on health impacts. Layla August, let me see. I would hope everyone in Elk Grove would be contacted when meeting regarding cell antennas are planned. Okay, comment noted. Then how would residents be notified if the towers can be approved under a minor use permit? Do minor use permits require a public hearing?
Yeah, my understanding is that they do. I spoke with Christopher Jordan, and he said that it does require a public hearing, and public hearings require a 500-foot noticing within 500-foot radius of the proposed project.
Okay, another comment. This is comment from Lana Shearer. Comment, I am in favor of improved service always and approve of small cell sites in general. However, the location should be located as far away from residences and schools as possible to achieve the coverage objective and minimize exposure. Again, the sites are selected by the carriers as long as they meet the requirements in the Elk Grove Municipal Code, and as long as they meet the requirements of the FCC. There's not too much we can do about where they place them. We can obviously talk to them about placement, but aside from that, as long as they meet the requirements, they're allowed to propose locations on cities' streetlights, the two type that we've talked about. Justin Danaher, I was under the impression the devices were going to be installed at a school. I apologize if I was misled by individuals online. No problem. That's why we're here to answer questions. I'm sure there's a lot of information floating around. Let me see. Okay, how many small, this is from Lynn Wheat, how many small cells can be placed on a single light pole? Could another provider beside AT&T use the same pole? At this time, no, they cannot. There was talk originally about co-locating in order to reduce the number, but the providers had trouble co-locating. So what we've done is said, okay, no matter who puts it up, they can't be closer than 500 feet. So again, it can't be AT&T not locating their pole, their cell sites within 500 feet. It's small cells, period. So if AT&T is in one location and 500 feet, Verizon is located, that's the minimum separation. No provider could add another site in the vicinity of those two. It has to be greater than 500 feet. I hope that makes sense. Will these towers be 5G? What we've been told right now by the carriers is no, but they certainly can be upgraded to 5G. I think that's the intent, is they're going to use 4G equipment and then ultimately be able to upgrade to 5G. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bob. I actually have a comment on Lynn Wee's question again as well, and then I can help answer Commissioner Weezer's question also. So, Lynn, the other consideration, again, since these are being installed on light poles, is that I think it'll be very difficult for them to co-locate due to structural requirements. Don't know that the poles will be capable of supporting, the type of equipment that's being proposed currently. But as again, Bob said, and as everyone knows, technology changes, everything's getting smaller, and so that could change in the future. But right now, again, there's a 500-foot spacing requirements for small cells. And then the towers being 5G, we do have a 5G type approved in our master license agreement with Verizon. It's much small. Again, it's much smaller than the 4G antenna that you see here. And I can actually pull it up, Bob, if you.
Go ahead. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So I'll pull that up while Bob continues to answer questions here at the example of the 5G rendering.
Let me see. Okay, which one are we at? Okay, another one from Omar. What would the process then be in requesting the city discuss with AT&T changing the location of the proposed cell tower, as from the answer to my last question, it seems that this is an option. Ideally, it would be away from schools and neighborhoods, particularly if there are concerns from the residents. I'm going to presume, Omar, that you're talking about the one on Power Inn next to Medina Way. Jeff, have you talked to AT&T about that particular site?
So I actually have talked to AT&T about the location adjacent to Medina Way. They did look at alternative locations and were not able to find any that were suitable for them in compliance with the MLA that were substantially any different. In other words, all of the locations were along the frontage of the school and would only simply move the problem up or down a light bulb, or move the location up or down a light bulb.
Okay, question from Mackenzie Weezer while Jeff calls up the 5G rendering. Mackenzie says, how many of these will we expect to have on our stoplights? None at this point. Again, that would be like a street light. They must provide a rendering of what it would look like, and that has to go to the city council as an amendment to the master license agreement. So at this particular time, there are no small cells proposed for traffic signals or stoplights. That doesn't mean that couldn't change in the future, but again, the carrier would have to do a computer rendering. It would have to go to the city council, and the city council would have to agree that the looks of it would be acceptable, the aesthetic look of it would be acceptable to the city council. Let's see here. Next one is from Susan Mason. Has any environmental impact been done on the small cell towers? I don't remember that backyards were excluded. There was discussion on corner lots where the front yard ended. It seems that more people will be exposed if they enjoy their backyards. There's no, just to say, I don't remember that backyards were excluded. The only prohibition the council adopted was it couldn't be in streetlights in somebody's front yard. Side yards, backyards would still be acceptable as a possible location. Again, it's all due to aesthetics. And to answer the first question, has any environmental impact been done on the small cell towers? Not that I know of. Again, the FCC has determined that there are not any environmental impacts, and actually the city is not. We can't take into account environmental factors in reviewing the applications for small cell locations. Then Mr. Graham says, where does the Telecommunications Act of 1996 say that the city cannot consider the effects of cell antennas on schools and education and regulate them to protect the same? I'll give you a hint. TCA does not say that. Okay, so obviously we're not lawyers, we're engineers. What we do is we rely on the city attorney's office to answer those types of questions. And the city attorney's office is part of the development of the master license agreement and the meetings that were held before the city council and other questions that were asked at various city council meetings, has reviewed all of that information, and the master license agreements, the zoning code amendments that were adopted, everything we've done has been in compliance with the requirements as reviewed by the city attorney's office. So we go based on the interpretation they provide us. If you're asking us to provide you interpretation of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, I can't do that. All I can tell you is that we're the process that we've developed and everything, the master license agreement, everything is developed based on the review and advice of the city attorney's office. Another question, Mr. Graham, is Jonathan Hobbs the city attorney on this conference call again? No, Mr. Hobbs is not. It's just myself, Bob Murdoch, and Jeff Werner. Another one from late August. The mayor told me personally that street lights on the corner in the front yard will not have approved poles. Yes, if it's in the front yard. And I think, if it's on the corner, if you're say a house that is right on the corner of a street, a lot of times a street light pole will be put right on the corner to illuminate the intersection. What the city council said is they would consider that a front yard installation and would not be acceptable. So it couldn't go on the corner, of an intersection if your house was right there on the corner. I hope that makes sense. Ms. Saturn, question is about regulating the operation of cell antennas. In my May 18th letter, I asked the city to regulate the operation of cell antennas to protect residents' health, and there are several ways to do that. The city can regulate the antennas, or that antennas are pointed away from homes. The city can require lower RF waves at all times other than peak usage. Mr. Warner, your response on July 20th did not respond to this. All year was cities may not regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities on the basis of environmental (health effects) of radio frequency emissions to the extent that such facilities comply with the commissions, that would be the FCC's regulation concerning such emissions. We're referring to Title 47 of the United States Code, subsection 332, paragraph C, subparagraph 7B. That is not responsive. The key word is operation. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 allows cities to regulate the operation of cell antennas and does not preempt such regulation. Again, we rely on the advice of the city attorney's office. We're regulating the installation and operation as best we can, given the FCC's requirements. The FCC decides on the equipment and the emissions from the equipment, and they've determined that as regulated, equipment does not have health impacts. Diane Saturn, what is your response to this? I think that was referencing the previous question that I just read. Mackenzie Weezer, yes, but how many are we going to have? Overall, I don't know how many overall the carriers will want to install. We've actually asked that question. What is their overall plan? They've come back and said they do not have an overall plan they can provide us as of yet. I don't know what to tell you there. I would think, right now, how many right now or sites are part of the MLAs?
So there are 14 approved in the AT&T master license agreement and 23 in the Verizon agreement.
Okay, so 14 and 23. So right now, close to 40 have been approved. Will they be more? In my opinion, I would anticipate they would be, but that's not a guarantee. That the carriers have indicated there probably would be, but right now they don't know how many, and they certainly haven't talked about where they would go. And if they do go, they're not part of. If they're new sites identified, they're not part of the master license agreement, which would mean they would have to go through the process that Mr. Warner described previously. And another one from Mr. Danaher. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the front yard 500-foot restriction is more a matter of visual impact and site nuisance. That is correct. That is what I've said. I said when the council looked at it from an aesthetic issue, the reason they restricted it from the front yards is really aesthetic. They thought, if somebody walked out their front yard, they maybe didn't want to look at this as opposed to a side yard or backyard. If people want the city to, Mr. Denner goes on to say, if the people want the city to be able to regulate based on health effects, they should form a group and others who are concerned and sue the FCC to get their concerns addressed. Mr. Graham's next question or statement is, the city's master license agreement with AT&T says, this pre-approved list of small cell wireless communication facilities may be amended or supplemented from time to time by the city manager in the city manager's discretion. The MLA does not describe the process for the city manager to amend or supplement the list or the criteria that he must or may consider. Please elaborate on those. I believe it's in the, the process is in the municipal code as to how cell sites that are not part of the last master license agreement would be added to the master license agreement.
That's correct. So the way the process works, Mark, is that the city manager has discretion to add locations to the MLA as long as they're in compliance with the zoning code. So if the location is in an industrial area, and since that's a by right use, no additional entitlements are required. And as long as the locations are in compliance with the MLA, specifically, they are the correct type of street light. And we feel that they can provide the structural adequacy and the power connections, then the city manager can go ahead and administratively add that to the MLA upon recommendation from staff. The other locations that would require an MUP or a CUP would have to go through the zoning approval process, and they would have to receive those entitlements before the city manager could then add those locations to the master license agreement.
Okay. August, side yard, okay. Side yards across the street from a front yard are not supposed to be able to have a cell antenna. If a cell site is proposed across the street from a front yard, then it would be denied. Mackenzie, what did you say at this time? I think you're referring, Ms. Weiser, to the number of, because your previous question was how many cell sites is there ultimately going to be proposed. All we know is the close to 40 sites that have been proposed as part of the master license agreement. We've asked AT&T and Verizon, could you give us an overall plan of where you want to put these throughout the city so we could look at that? And they said they don't have such a plan. We've asked, well, how many ultimately do you think you'd want to place? And they didn't have a number either. And again, we're only talking to AT&T and Verizon. There are other carriers that have the ability, but they would have to come in and get their own master license agreement. So now how many ultimately could be placed in the city of Elk Grove or any other city or county? We can't answer that at this time. All we know is they're welcome to apply for additional sites as outlined in the municipal code, and they'd have to go through the process that was described by Mr. Werner.
If you don't mind, Bob,
Go ahead,
I'd like to add to that. The other issue at hand is that we don't control deployment on private locations. So the MLAs only cover deployment on public facilities. The code does allow or does not prohibit the installation of small cells on private buildings or otherwise poles, as long as they comply with the zoning code.
Okay. Next one is Ms. Sater, the city can amend its Elk Grove municipal codes for more rigorous regulations to prohibit placements of these cell antennas. Yet the city chooses not to do so. The city has regulated to prohibit in front of residential dwelling. It should prohibit from residential zones, period. So to kind of answer the first statement, we can adopt more rigorous regulations to prohibit placement. That's not correct. I think in the beginning, Mr. Werner went over kind of our ability to regulate, and that's actually limited by the Federal Communications Commission. We can't just say no. If we end up over-regulating, basically what happens is we end up not having control over where they place them. We've adopted, based on advice of the city attorney, the regulations we think can reasonably be defended if a carrier wants to sue the city. So, I mean, we went through the process. We've got a master license agreement. We've adopted code amendments. And a number of questions and comments so far have been related to, say, health impacts. And again, we don't have the ability to regulate based on health impact. That's why the code was adopted the way it was. We do not have the ability to adopt a more rigorous code or prohibitions based on environmental or health impacts. Next one is Ms. Weiser. Thank you for clarifying that we cannot have them piggybacking like that. I appreciate it. I think the thought of having 2 or 3 carriers on one pole would be way too much. Okay, thank you. Next one is from Deborah Baird. 5G is not the same frequency as 4G and borders known hazardous frequencies. I'm asking if any safety data has been provided specifically on the 5G frequency, not piggybacking on 4G data safety. I know FCC has said 5G may be used without any research on it. To clarify, my question is, if there are citizens' rights to a safety data sheet on 5G, can they require safety data for 5G frequencies specifically? I don't know of any requirement for the carriers to provide safety data sheets. For 5G, again, the FCC regulates the equipment, regulates the output of that equipment, and they've determined that the regulations have been structured in a way that does not result in health hazards. That's all I can say on that. Let me see. Next one is from Mr. Graham. Unless Mr. Hobbs tells you that the city cannot consider the effects of cell antenna on schools and education and regulate them to protect the same, I ask the city to consider those things now for the site at 8661 Power Inn Road. Clearly, the city did not consider them. I have attended every meeting. Okay, we certainly can pass that on, that question on or comment on to Mr. Hobbs. Where are we at here? Okay, another one, Ms. Saturn. Will the city consider regulating the operation of cell antennas? For example, by limiting the operation to only last 1 hour before the start of the school day and the first 1.5 hours after the end of the school day, or clearly identified times of peak usage, will you commit to making a report or recommendation on this to the city council? Well, unfortunately, Ms. Saturn, I can't, because the FCC has determined how this equipment will operate. We can't go in and tell the carrier when they can and cannot operate them. The FCC has determined the equipment and how they operate. Ms. Weiser, can you put a document together that goes on the small cell page that lays out the MLA? Well, we do. We have the master license agreements on the city's small cell page. We have the process we use to review and issue permits. We have a lot of information that's actually on the small cell page. So I would encourage people to go look and see what they find. If you have questions, you're welcome to email myself or Mr. Werner if you can't find the information there. But we've put a great deal of information over the last few months on the city's small cell webpage. Then the next part of that question was, can you put down all the by right uses the zoning admin uses and the MUP and CUP decisions? I think that would help the public. Trying to understand, I'm not sure if I understand your question completely. By using, can you put down?
I guess, Bob, let me take a stab at this. So there is a table in the zoning code, it was referenced in my presentation, that outlines all of the required entitlements for the various land uses and the various types of facility. So that table would definitely disclose all of the by right uses. The only one that I'm aware of for small cell is the industrial zone. The zoning admin uses, so again, I think the zoning admin would be the uses that would oversee all of the minor conditional use permits, the MUPs, and the conditional use permit decisions are made by the planning commissioner and planning commission, and Commissioner Weiser would know that better than myself. And those, all of the MUP and CUP entitlement delineations are made in that table. So there's a link to the zoning code out on the website, on the small cell webpage specifically as well. You can find it on our website if you so choose. Again, it's Title 23 is the zoning code.
Okay. You followed that up, Ms. Weiser, there isn't a way to get the MLA agreement mapped out. I'm not sure what mapped out means.
She may be asking to put maps of the locations that are approved in the MLA on the website, and I guess I would encourage her to reach out to me directly or clarify her question here,
Okay.
and I can figure out what she's asking for, and we can certainly work on that if that's a
Okay.
question or concern.
Okay, you're gonna clear those. Let's see. Okay. Next one is from Mr. Graham. What sections of the zoning code, Title 23 describe the process for the city manager to amend or supplement the list on the criteria that he must or may consider? I think
So it would be based on the use criteria, right? So the entitlements again are.
but he's asking what specific section.
Let me look it up here. I have it.
We can look it up and get back to you, or if we always can get that information to you. We can email you tomorrow if need be. but we'll get that to you either tonight or tomorrow. Go ahead.
The table is table 23.27-1, and I imagine that's in chapter 2327. So
Take a look there. If you can't find it, follow up here on the question Q&A. Ms. Saturn, FCC regulations do not prohibit the city from regulating the operation of cell towers, nor does the TCA. Well, Ms. Saturn, I mean, we rely on the city attorney's office and the city attorney for reviewing regulations and federal regulations and the law. And, we're regulating to the best of the ability that they allow us. That's all I really can tell you. Layla August, I'm sorry, are you saying private poles can have antennas closer than 500 feet from another cell antenna, private or the cities? I am not clear, I wasn't aware. No. If it's on private property, it still have to be at least 500 feet away. And I think the idea here is for example, you do have like commercial shopping centers and they have street light, obviously light poles in their parking lots. An owner there could apply for a small cell. They would have to go through the city's process. I think, Jeff, would that process be, say, if a commercial, area had a parking lot with a light on it and they wanted to put a small cell, what process would they need to follow?
they would need to follow either the conditional use permit or the minor conditional use permit. And I'm pulling up the table now
Okay.
to determine.
But part of the review of that would be they would not be able to be within 500 feet of another location. So, for example, if a city street light out on the frontage of the commercial area had a small cell on it, wherever their proposed location would have to be at least 500 feet away.
So all commercial zoning districts require a conditional use permit.
Okay. The next one is from Ms. Saturn. You didn't answer my question about regulating the operation of cell towers, or cell antennas. In my May 18th letter, I asked the city to regulate the operation of cell antennas to protect residents' health. I think we've seen this one. We've seen that one. We answered that. Again, we're regulating the location based on what we're allowed to do based on federal law and regulation. Okay. Mark Graham says, Mr. Murdoch, you are not listening carefully to Ms. Saturn's question. TCA does not preempt the city from regulating the operation of a cell antenna. I'm very familiar with it. The city has dodged this question consistently and repeatedly. I'm asking the city to consider that and for staff to report to the city council on this. Well, I'll certainly go back to Mr. Hobbs tomorrow and say, look, this question was raised about regulating the operation. At this point in time, I think we're regulating it based on what we're allowed to do, but I certainly can pass that specific question on to Mr. Hobbs and get back to you and Ms. Saturn on this and others that are asking questions. We do have everybody's email address, and we certainly can follow up with everybody based on what we find out from Mr. Hobbs on the operation of a cell antenna. Mackenzie Weezer, thank you. Clearly, I need to check this out. Yes, Jeff's table is perfect. Thank you. Deborah Baird, just to clarify that I understand your response and hopefully find an answer. FCC has no safety data or research on 5G, leaving it to companies who also haven't done research or data on it. If you can't require safety, where will the safety of 5G happen if the city doesn't? So we say, just to clarify that I understand your response and hopefully find an answer. FCC has no safety data or research on 5G. I didn't say that. But it is up to the FCC to regulate it. I don't know the extent of the information that FCC has on 5G, but the regulations are clear that we can't regulate for health impacts. I'm sure you can go to the FCC's website. Maybe you could find some additional information on the research that they've used in developing the regulations that they've adopted on that. So again, I'm not saying that the FCC hasn't got research or safety data. I would refer you to their FCC's website. Ms. Saturn asked, The question is regarding the biannual random testing to ensure EMF compliance. In my May 18th letter, I asked the city to require biannual random testing of each small cell antenna to determine compliance with RF limits, as the cities of Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley have done at the applicant's expense by an independent and neutral third party, and to have continuous monitoring with automatic shutoff. Mr. Werner, your response on July 20th said, carriers are required to comply with FCC regulations. At this time, the city does not require biannual random testing. However, the city is reviewing Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley process to better understand the rationale and feasibility for such an approach. It has been almost 3 months since we asked the city to require the random testing. Where is the city at with this? Well, first I'd like to say, anytime we adopt a new process, and the permitting process is a new process, it's going to evolve over time. I think the comment based on what Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley have done is a good comment, and that we said we would take a look into it, we would. The only thing is I'd like to give some context. There are small cells going in all over the state with other cities and counties up and down the state. And so Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley are a few of them. Everybody, generally speaking, a lot of things are in common, but different municipalities do things a little differently. Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley, for whatever reason, have decided to ask for biannual random testing. I don't know of any other municipalities that have asked for that, even though a number of them have adopted or considering small cell antenna installations. So it's something we can look at, but in the end, the carriers are required to comply with the FCC regulations, and part of that is how that equipment operates. And so it is something that we'll take a look at. We haven't gotten through it yet. I know it's been 3 months. I apologize for the delay, but I want to let everybody know that this is a new process, and I would anticipate it will evolve as other city processes do, as more information becomes available, as other cities and municipalities look at different things and more information is developed. So next one is Ms. Weiser. Yes, maps on the website. I will follow up with Jeff, but I think residents would love to know where each of these proposed sites are well in advance, like on the planning GPS site. Okay, that's a good comment. Thank you for that. Ms. Saturn, why is Mr. Hobbs not on this call? He is the city attorney and should be involved in every part of the process. Well, Ms. Saturn, we certainly can pass on the questions and comments and get a response from Mr. Hobbs, but this was a question about the site next to Modena Way, permitting process, that kind of thing, and we're the ones that operate that and manage that, so we figured we would be the ones to answer the questions. We certainly can get responses as needed from Mr. Hobbs and pass them along. Mr. Graham, according to AT&T's coverage map, they already provide 5G coverage at 8661 Power Inn Road in the vicinity. Please look at their website, at their webpage during this call, and then answer the question. Type in the address. I will show you. Consider this. Why does the city have to permit any new cell antennas? Again, as Mr. Werner noted during his PowerPoint, the carriers don't have to show coverage or use coverage or lack of coverage as a justification for a location. It's not something that is considered. So if they have coverage based on your research, they've, for whatever reason, determined that they need additional coverage.
Well, I can add to that. So in the FCC order, it specifically calls out densification of the network as well. So even though they might have coverage there, according to the order, they're allowed to go ahead and densify that. And again, we're prohibited from inhibiting that process.
And the one thing that the carriers told us in the beginning is they've seen just a huge increase in streaming, in the demand for data, and it's just exponentially increasing, and they anticipate that continuing well into the future. And so I think some of what they're doing, what they told us, is anticipating that additional need and trying to get ahead of it. So you may, in this instance, have a location where they have coverage, but they're anticipating additional need perhaps in that area. But that's something they passed on to us, and just thought I'd let everybody know what they had said. Next comment is from Mike. Let me see, is there any concrete evidence that 5G has the potential to hurt us? From everything I've read, it'll most likely be similar to a 4G tower, but we will just need more of them due to the lack of range. I've been reading that overseas in South Korea, they have about 7 million 5G users and no adverse health repercussions have been mentioned from them. Surely this should stop people's concerns that it could hurt us. Can't speak to the reference to the data on South Korea. All I can say is the FCC is regulating it based on health. They develop their regulations based on information that they developed or was provided to them. If someone is interested in what data they might have used, I would refer you to the FCC's website. Perhaps they would have information on what data they used in developing their regulations and how this equipment is supposed to operate. Next question or comment from Ms. Saturn. Has the city contacted the cities of Davis, Burbank, and Berkeley to learn about their random testing?
So yeah, actually, I did in fact contact those 3 cities. I only received one response, and the response that I received was that the process was new to them and they hadn't actually done any of the random testing yet. And that's similar to us. We don't have any 5G or small cell towers deployed in our city at this time. And again, Bob will scold me for using the word tower, but nonetheless, we have been in contact with them, and like Bob said, we'll be continuing to look into that and determine if that's an option for us and something that makes sense.
And the other part is, will you commit to reporting to the council on what each of these cities requires on random testing and make a recommendation to council? I can't commit to that because we're still trying to understand what the cities are requiring and why they're requiring them. So I can't commit to saying I'd take something to city council if I don't really know right now that information. So next one is from Ms. Baird. Okay, has the city considered fines for overpowering antennas or frequencies? I don't know, there's no fines, but if they somehow operated the equipment outside of the limits as prescribed by the FCC. I'm sure the FCC has ways of or powers in order to deal with it, but I don't specifically know what that is. But the city doesn't have any.
In terms of our MLA master license agreement, there are no fines associated with operating illegally. I'll use the term. Again, like Bob said, I think any fines would be imposed by the FCC or agencies having jurisdiction over those legal requirements. The master license agreement does, however, give us the ability to tell the carrier to remove their facilities from our facilities or from our poles if they are found to be operating illegally or otherwise adversely.
Right. Okay.
So that is the end of the written questions. I did see that Ms. Baird sent a couple of emails in, Bob, and I think, however, we answered all of those questions. So let me pull those up.
Okay.
Does the city have any options for limiting our children's exposure during school hours while attending school from untested 5G frequencies?
We answered that.
I think we answered that. Regarding health impacts. And again, more safety data on the 5G frequencies. And I know that how do we know this does not affect children from long-term broadcasting? So we did address all of Mrs. Baird's questions, I believe, with regards to the health impacts.
Let's see. Okay, so Ms. Saturn said I have a couple more. Okay, so let's see. Question about insurance. The master license agreement requires the carrier to have section 9 on page 11 of the MLA requires the company to maintain insurance coverage and to deliver the required proof of insurance to the city. Exhibit D says The required general liability coverage shall contain the following provisions and endorsements. But nothing's written, nothing's there. So Jeff, on the insurance coverage, okay, yeah, they are required to provide a proof of insurance.
I'm not seeing a question yet.
Yeah. Okay. Policy shall contain no special limitations impairing the scope of coverage afforded to the city, its officials, employees, or volunteers herein other than for claims solely caused by the additional insured or, okay.
Or they can't see these questions.
Okay, this means that an insurance policy that excludes coverage for bodily injury or damages caused by electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic fields, etc., is insufficient. The big insurance companies such as Lloyd's of London and Swiss Re do not insure against bodily injury from EMF. And in June 22nd email to Mark Graham, Mr. Murdoch wrote, any insurance provided per the small cell requirements will be reviewed by the city's risk manager, and no permit will be issued until the insurance is determined to satisfy the city's requirements. Okay.
So the question is here.
Okay. Okay. Question, Ms. Satron, what are the exclusions in the insurance policy the company has provided to the city? Has the city's risk manager evaluated the company's insurance documents and made a determination as to adequacy of the company's insurance? If there is one, this is my formal public records request, requesting you send me a copy of this determination. Well, as of right now, we don't, from AT&T, we don't have adequate insurance. They have not provided that documentation that we need. So no determination has been made other than they haven't given us what's required to be given to us. At some point in the future, I would believe that AT&T would ultimately provide that if they want to actually install the small cells based on the MLA. And as soon as that insurance is, the documentation is received and the city's risk manager reviews it and determines that it is adequate, then we would move forward. And so you're asking for a public records requesting to be sent a copy of this determination. Okay, so currently there is no determination. You certainly can submit a public records request in the future. I mean, we don't really have any public record to give you because it doesn't exist because no determination has been made, I guess. Trying to answer.
Well, I would think that the PRA, if you were to actually submit a formal PRA on this, Mrs. Saturn, you would want to be a little bit more specific, whether you're requesting a copy of the approved policy or other things. And again, I can't comment on whether or not these are releasable documents, but nonetheless, I would encourage you to submit a more formal written PRA so that you get exactly what you're after. But we would be more than happy to provide you with that. And I think just to clarify Bob's comment here, we have received an insurance submittal from AT&T. It's just been deemed deficient, so they haven't provided all of the endorsements or required additional insured being named in the policy for us to approve it because it does not comply with what's required.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Barrett says, I would like to see the city add fines for companies operating out of FCC regulations to cover cost of random testing. Can that be added? Probably fines would be more difficult to add. If we end up wanting to do random testing, we would go back and modify the master license agreement. We would just require probably the carriers just to pay for the testing in some way, shape, or form. That way you're not relying on determining if a particular site is operating outside of FCC regulations. You're just asking the carriers to pay for it up front.
Let me clear some of these out of the way for you.
Okay, let me see.
And that way they can see these questions as well.
Okay. Okay, is that the next one?
This is next.
Okay, Ms. Saturn wrote, Mr. Werner, your August 6th email indicated that moving forward with tonight's meeting will not preclude us from having additional meetings in the future. Therefore, I'm formally asking the city to hold a follow-up meeting with an official agenda, which will include and provide the date, time, and Zoom information and link to register for the meeting, and to provide adequate notice to all Elk who may have interest in participating in this meeting. When I say adequate notice, that should be at least 10 business days notice in advance. So the original request for this meeting really had to do with the petition and response, trying to provide a response to concerns to residents of Modena Way. Now, what I'm seeing here is a request really for a citywide meeting, which is completely different. The city council did have a council meeting on this when adopting the master license agreement. So I guess what I'm seeing is you want a citywide Zoom meeting on this. That's certainly a request that we can consider. I don't know if I can answer that right now on this, but let us look at it and we'll get back to you. Ms. Saturn, this information shall be updated on the city's small cell antenna webpage, and I ask that this meeting not be scheduled until all of my PR requests have been fulfilled and I've been provided adequate time to review all the documents provided to me by the PRA request. Based on the previous PRA request, I received 611 pages. I'm asking the city to allow me at least 30 calendar days to review my pending PRA request. This will give me ample time to review the information, allow me to be prepared for the upcoming meeting request with any additional questions or requests in which I, my neighbors, and other affected Elk Grove residents may have. Okay. Again, my previous response on the citywide meeting is something we'll take a look at and we'll get back to you on that. There's one question that Jeff and I were trying to figure out as we came into this meeting. And the meeting was really structured around trying to, again, answer the questions and concerns of Modena Way residents. I know Ms. Saturn is a resident of that street. Is there anybody else on this Zoom meeting that is a resident? I'm trying to understand. I think Omar, we know that Omar, I'm sorry, I don't know his last name, Omar Ahmed, sorry, Mr. Ahmed. We know Mr. Ahmed is a resident. So right now we know of 2 Modena Way residents on as part of this meeting. If you're willing to identify if you're a resident as well, it'd be helpful for us to be able to know how many residents we reached with this. Okay, have you, Mr. Murdoch, this is from Mr. Graham, have you, Mr. Murdoch or Mr. Werner, communicated with the Elk Grove School District about the proposed cell antenna to 8661 Power Inn Road? What did Elk Grove Unified School District staff ask you or say to you? What were your responses? Jeff?
So yeah, we have communicated with EGUSD. We told them about this location. They also had questions about another location adjacent to a school. We provided them with essentially all of the information that we're providing you with here tonight. The history and the background on how the zoning code amendments were made, the review and approval of the master license agreements, and we've provided them with all of that information. So again, at their request, they asked us to look at what options there are for relocating these locations, and we've communicated that to AT&T, and they looked into it and have gotten back to us for the Power Inn Road location with some proposed locations that, again, really just moved it up and down the street and didn't move it away from the school. The other location, we're able to work with AT&T to ask them to propose a new location. They're currently looking into that.
Okay. Next comment is from Ms. Shearer. Says, I know this is not that forum, but there should be an amendment to the MLA to maintain a distance of at least 300 feet from the nearest residence and classroom playground area. I have to leave the meeting at 8:30 p.m. Please email me the webpage address for this proposed site. So I guess this is, we're going to interpret that to mean a small cell, city small cell webpage. We will certainly email that link to you, Ms. Shearer. This next one is from Mr. Ahmed. He's confirming he's a resident of Medina Way. Mr. Toda, T-O-T-A-H, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, also noted that he's on Medina Way, lives on Medina Way as well. Ms. Shearer, next comment was, I am East Elk Road, not far from Monterey Trails High School campus. Okay. Say term, what are the exclusions in the insurance that AT&T has filed with the city?
I don't have a copy of their full submittal here, and I don't see any on the document that I have from our third-party reviewer.
What we can do is pass that question on to our risk manager. And so when we actually get a final document, we can ask our risk manager to provide the exclusions that AT&T has included. Next question is from Susan Mason. Why did AT&T withdraw their application for a small cell tower at Laguna Creek High School? I live near Laguna Creek High School.
Well, they have not withdrawn their application for that. Again, they're looking into potentially relocating that location to a location away from the school. The concern there is that there's a second story window close by. And again, we're just responding to the school district's concerns, and we passed that information along to AT&T, and they were willing to consider a relocation.
Okay, the next one is from Ms. Baird. I am not a resident of that street, but a resident of Elk Grove, and the outcome of this will affect all of Elk Grove and schools in my area as well. Okay. Mr. Graham, consider that AT&T already provides 5G coverage at 8661 Powering Road in the vicinity. What criteria did AT&T use when considering alternative locations? I don't know the question. I don't know the answer to that. Again, coverage is not an issue that is part of the application process. And you go on to say, Mr. Graham goes on to say, it is not reasonable for them to only compare it to the next light pole to the east or the next light pole to the west and say there are no acceptable alternative locations. Okay, thank you for that comment. Next one is Ms. Saturn. What exactly do you mean by second story window nearby?
So the street light in question is adjacent to a two-story building. Again, the two-story school building. It is more than 50 feet away, and based on the RF reports, there's no danger there, I'll say. It's certainly in compliance with all the FCC limitations. But because we received a request from the school district, we, just like we have with all these other requests, to review the RF compliance reports or provide clarification from AT&T that we've received from Mr. Graham and others. We passed that along to our licensee AT&T, and they considered relocating the locations.
And have they come to a final determination on that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. So, I mean, AT&T was willing to look at that, but again, they're going to move it, within the vicinity. And so they are willing to work with us, but they still have a need for coverage based on their own rationale. And so we do appreciate AT&T being willing to look at that, although we don't have a final answer yet. Okay, we don't.
So I think at this point, Bob, it's 8:30. We did receive a couple of requests for some dial-in information. And I think at this point, it would be nice to open it up to those folks if I can get them online here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Again, I just want to point out this is the 5G antenna. As you can see, it's much smaller. If those of you that are looking at the screen that I'm sharing here, it's much smaller than what the 4G antennas look like. This is 4G, and this is 5G. And then for those that are interested, perhaps Commissioner Weezer is still on the line. This is the other, or Lynn Wheat, this is the other type of pole that's approved for both AT&T and Verizon, and antenna, radios, and this is the 5G version. So before we respond to that written one, if you want to respond, Bob, I'll see if I can identify the.
Ms. Saturn asks, do we have an ETA on the applicant's resubmission of their document pertaining to insurance and bond? No, we do not. We are simply waiting. We've let them know what's needed, and we are simply waiting for them to provide the information. Until then, their application is not complete, and I think the 45-day requirement to either issue or not issue the permit does not get started. So it's in limbo at this moment. I suppose they could show up with the information tomorrow, or they could show up 3 months from now or next year. It's really entirely up to AT&T.
Yeah, the only thing we do know with regard to timing from AT&T is that they've indicated that they don't intend to come in for their encroachment permit for construction until at the earliest 2021.
Okay.
So we do have one call-in user identified in the participant list. So I'm going to open their mic and ask that they.
Do we have a phone number that so you
We
can?
don't. They're defined as call-in user 1. So call-in user 1, you're now unmuted. Are you able to identify yourself and let us know if you have any questions?
Are they unmuted?
Call-in user 1.
I'm here.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we can hear
Yes.
you.
May I ask several questions?
Absolutely.
Here we go. There was a map of the locations that were approved by the city council, but they did not come with the addresses of those locations. So it would have been a very difficult thing for anybody to find out where the locations were, especially the one by Monterey Trail High School. The maps were small, and they should be online, but they were very difficult to read. The second comment I have is that this location should not be about AT&T or Verizon, but about the citizens and the neighbors of Elk Grove. I guess my next question would be, are you listening? Can you hear me?
Yes.
When and how were the neighbors notified of this location? That's the third. Do you want me to wait?
Well, so far, ma'am, I've only heard one question.
Okay.
And-
Let's see. This is a comment because I attended almost all the meetings of the City Council. The FCC has done no testing on cell towers whatsoever or small cells. There was a congressman that the City Council had on and was presented at one of the meetings where the carriers were asked in a public meeting before the congressman, have there been any studies done on 4G, 5G, 6G, 3G, 2G, whatever? And the answer was no. No testing has been done. And then my last comment is, in the new general plan, it states that the safety and welfare of its citizens needs to be considered for any new projects or proposals. And that I know is at the beginning of the general plan. I don't remember where, but I think that's important for people to look for. And also, the last statement I have is fiber optics is faster and safer, and Elk Grove, I have just found out, has many areas of the city that do have fiber optics. That is a wonderful choice to go with. Thank you.
Okay. I guess, I don't know if I missed the questions or it was more of comments, but okay, thank you. Go ahead, Jeff.
I think I heard one question there, Bob.
Okay.
It was, how were residents noticed?
Okay. They were, it was part of a normal agendized city council meeting. So, the public notice would have been the publishing of the agenda for the master license agreement adoption. That would have been the notice that went out to essentially everybody in the city at that time. So that would be the notice that was provided. So who's next? What do you want to do here?
So we have written comments here, and I don't know
Okay.
if there are any. So I guess we'll address the written comments
Okay.
and open it back up to.
Another comment from a or question: will the recording of tonight's video including comments and questions, be published on the city's website. Also, will a copy of your PowerPoint presentation be published as well? Yes. Yes, we'll include a copy, the recording of tonight's meeting, and Jeff will make sure the PowerPoint is also on the small cell webpage. The next comment is from Mr. Graham. The table 23.27-1 that you referred to does not identify the process for the city manager to follow or the things he may or may not consider to amend or supplement the list of cell antenna sites. I'm looking at it now. It only says that a small cell requires an MUP in many, maybe all residential zones. You did not answer my question about section 4.2A of the MLA on this issue. So I'll tell you what we can do. We'll go back in into the code, and we'll make sure we get you the right answer. We'll have to get to you tomorrow with that, hopefully. We took it down, or do you want to try it, Joe?
Well, yeah, I mean, I hope I can answer Mark's question here. The code identifies the entitlements that are required for a small cell location in a given zoning area, right? A given use. So if a new location is proposed, then if that location is in a residential area, then the applicant or the licensee would need to then comply with the zoning code and obtain the necessary entitlement. That would either be a minor conditional use permit or a conditional use permit. Once that entitlement is obtained, then the city manager, pursuant to the MLA, and this is how the MLA reads, would then be allowed to amend the location or add the location to the master license agreement. And again, I gave the example the other way. The first time, I think I said that if it's an industrial area, which is a by right use, the city manager, again, pursuant to the MLA, section 4.2A, would then have the authority or the ability to amend the map, amend the list of locations by including that location in that industrial area.
Okay. Mr. Graham, if that doesn't answer your question, please let us know. We certainly can get into the code and give you a reference perhaps tomorrow. Okay, comment from the state attorney again. I have been formally noticed by the city about other projects, but why not this one? I'm not sure what other projects you've been noticed about, ma'am, but the way this worked was it was a city council agenda item, and the council agenda is noticed as it normally is, for the public to I guess read or to review to see if there's anything they want to participate in. So I think I can only tell you that that's how it was done. Let's see.
So we currently have no more written questions, and you're more than welcome to continue to do that. We have about 19 minutes left on the call here, Bob. We do have the ability to take oral comments if folks raise their hands. So if anyone has been unable to type in their questions and would like to raise their hand and be called upon, now would be the time to do so.
Yeah, Mr. Graham, here. So we're waiting, let's see. Anybody else? Can you scroll down, see if anybody else is
I
raising?
think that if they raise their hand, they're moved to the top of the list there.
Okay. Again, I'd like to give, since this meeting was in response to concerns by Medina Way residents, and we've got 3 identified. I'd like to give preference to those in the beginning. If, again, that's Ms. Saturn, Mr. Ahmed, and
Mr. Tota.
Mr. Tota. So if you have a question, we'd give you a little bit of preference here. If not, I know Mr. Grant has his hand up, so we'll give you people a few more seconds, and otherwise we'll call on Mr. Grant.
Okay.
All right. Can you Mr. Graham, can you hear us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Well, first I want to follow up. First, thank you for having this meeting. I really appreciate the effort that you're putting into it. And I agree with everything Diane Saturn has said tonight. Now, and thank you, Mr. Werner, for your explanation of the section 4.2A of the MLA as to how the city manager can amend or supplement the list. So am I to understand, it's because it sounds like from what you just explained a couple of minutes ago, that the process of amending or supplementing the list is really initiated by the company, by AT&T. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, all right. And so they file an application, and does the city manager, it says he has discretion. What's the scope or the extent of the city manager's discretion when he receives, I guess it would be an application from AT&T?
Again, I think I've explained that in explaining that his discretion is limited by the zoning code. In other words, he does not have the discretion to approve a location in a residential area without having the approved or the proper entitlement.
For example, I guess the city manager could not approve a location in somebody's front yard,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
He doesn't have because the code says you can't locate a site in somebody opens their front door where they see it in their front yard. City manager does not have authority to override that. Whatever he approves must be in compliance with the city's requirements.
All right. All right. Well, so that's what it means by in the city manager's discretion.
Yes, that's how I would interpret it.
Okay. So in other words, AT&T currently, as approved by the city council back in August and September of last year, there's a map and there are a total of 15 approved sites. Am I right?
There are actually 14.
Okay, 14.
Yep.
And in the first application, which we've been talking about tonight from last December, that was one individual site permit application, but it covers 5 of those 14, right?
Correct.
So my question is, can AT&T, if they see another, I don't know, a location anywhere in our wonderful city of Elk Grove, and they say, I think we should have a cell antenna there, can they just like file an application for it, or do they, I'm talking about for a location that's not already on the list? They can do that?
They can request a new location, yes. And I would encourage you, Mark, to look at section B of that same section 4.2. It does address further restrictions on the city manager's authority, and it highlights that it doesn't have authority to do this in a residential zoning district or ag-res zoning district.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, I'm looking at that and I appreciate it.
But you're right. I mean, the carrier can come in and ask for a location that's not currently part of the MLA, and then they have to follow the requirements in the code for obtaining the city's approval.
Okay. And I'll speak for myself, but I think that there are other people on this call and other people who are not on this call that would agree. What I would like to see is the next time that happens, I would like to see that process to be transparent and open. And by that, I mean notice to the local residents, give the notice and opportunity. This is just fundamental due process that we have in the United States 14th Amendment. And I don't know if that's written into it doesn't appear to be written into the MLA. I don't think it's written into the Title 23, Chapter 94, but just in the interest of not like, blindsiding people, will the city commit to having an open, transparent permitting process?
Yeah, I think we do have that process set up with regards to the permits. Again, this meeting is evidence of that. I think all of our correspondence with yourself, Mr. Graham, and Mrs. Saturn to date has been transparent to, certainly to the best of my ability in responding to the letters and so forth. And again, the MUP and CUP processes do require a public hearing, and those hearings are noticed.
Okay, and well, I think that we all know there's a difference between the notice that's required by the government code, the Ralph Brown Act. You know, the city has to post it at City Hall. They have to post it on the city's website, and it probably has to post it in the newspaper too. And that's like for every city council meeting, period. And we also know that for a city of 170,000 residents, there are very few people that actually make it their business to go find those notices and read them. But you know from looking at the map that when there's a house or a row of house, there are a row of houses across the street from one of these sites. And so the city, and I appreciate the correspondence, Mr. Murdoch and Mr. Werner, that I've had with both of you. You know, but I'm one person out of 170,000, and the people who don't ask but do live near a proposed site, I think they deserve to be notified, and not by longitude and latitude. That's my next question. What was the city's reasoning when it chose to identify the sites in the MLA by longitude and latitude, but not by the address?
Well, that's how they were identified. All of our streetlights have longitude and latitude because they really don't have a street address tied to them. There might be a street address near them, but there's no way we identify them in our GIS system with longitude and latitude. And we've provided to the carriers a copy of our GIS layer, and they identified them with latitude and longitude because that's how we identified them. So it was very clear when they told us by lat and long where they wanted to go, we specifically told them to do that because that really narrows in on which streetlight pole you're really talking about, because somebody could go out there and provide a nearby address, and we wanted to avoid confusion as to, well, which one are you specifically talking about? Are you talking about this one? Are you talking one just down the street, maybe across the street? Be very specific as to which one. And they came back using our longitude and latitude to clearly identify which of these poles, because I think we have upwards of 20,000 streetlight poles in town.
Yeah.
And we wanted to make sure they were going to be very precise about what they wanted to do.
Okay, and I appreciate the precision, and I realize that, you know, streetlight poles are only a couple 100 feet apart. And if you're standing, you know, on Power Inn Road, looking across the parking lot at Monterey Trail High School, yeah, there are multiple streetlights. I've walked there, you know, a number of times. But if I were the resident and I were looking at the proposed MLA, let's say the night that the council was going to vote on it, and I was trying to find out if this is something that's going to affect me in my house, I wouldn't have any idea. I own a house in Old Town Elk Grove, which I've owned for 7 years. There's a city-owned streetlight right out in front of my house, and I have no idea what the longitude and latitude of that pole are. And I don't think there's any person in the city that knows either.
Okay.
In other words, what I'm saying is I think that the process for amending or supplementing the list that we're talking about in section 4.2 of the MLA, it should, at bare minimum, identify the proposed sites by address.
Okay. I think it's point well taken.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Mr. Warner, you know, with all due respect, and like I said, I do appreciate the communication that I've had with you and with Mr. Murdoch, but to me, that is not the same as being transparent and open. Council member Darren Suen made a very clear statement in the community workshop, November 28, 2018 on this, and he said that he wanted the city to have transparency in the permitting process. And to me, it means transparency. It doesn't mean that if you receive an email from this person, you write back to them. That doesn't reach the other 170,000 residents of the city. So I think transparency means do your best to at least notify the people that are likely to be affected because they live nearby.
Okay. Mr. Graham, we have 8 minutes left, and I know.
Yeah, I'm finished. Thank you. I'm finished.
Okay.
Let somebody else talk.
I think Ms. Baird is next.
Yeah, she has her hand raised.
Yeah. Is there?
All right, Ms. Baird, you're being asked to unmute, so whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So I want to thank you for holding this, and I am a little bit confused on how like this is not being projected to all of the kids that would be going to that school and not just the location of the homes on that street. Because I think the more important thing is the long-term effects that we don't know, and the children that are there and the exposure they have, they're the ones that are more likely to be dealing with it if, like I said, if there is an issue. And I wish there was like a little bit more for that. And also I wonder, like, is there any way to hold accountable the companies? Because when you mentioned them testing themselves, it's almost like a moot point then. I feel like we have this big unknown, not that we don't know the frequency, we know the frequency, we know what it does as far as like working with our phones, but we don't know long term. And it's not that it will be dangerous, and it doesn't mean it is dangerous, but we don't know, and that doesn't, and the people that would be affected are the children. And so I'm looking at this as also related to the fact that we're talking about putting them next to schools and the long-term effects. And I don't see how, is there any way at all? I would feel better if I could find some way that the companies would be held accountable. And, you know, that's why I'm asking about fines. If I'm asking about, you know, anything, like, is it too late? Did I miss the boat of putting that into like the MLA? Like, where is there going to be any accountability if, not, like I said, if, not that it is, if there is danger or issues with safety?
Okay. Probably, trying to think. You're asking me to try to respond to something that may happen in the future, and we don't know.
No. Okay, so what I'm asking is, where in the MLA or in our CPUs or any of those things does the city, you've talked about FCC having regulations, but I apologize, I don't put my trust in the FCC as much as I do the city. I trust the city to protect me more than FCC. So what I'm wondering is, where is there any type of security in our city's plan for accepting these towers or locations that gives some accountability if there is an issue? Because there is that unknown. There is no safety data sheet. There is no research on it, and that I've looked at. You said go look at the FCC. I have looked for it, and I'm just looking for an answer. Is like, where's the accountability going to be? You know, why does the city not have fines set up if they're out of regulation? You know, like, so that you guys can deal with it versus letting a company sort of take care of themselves, which I don't trust at all. I mean, I do trust they will provide, but I don't trust that they, I've worked for a telecom company. I understand where their priorities are. So I'm just wondering, where in our stuff in the city, where are we protecting the children if there is an issue?
Well, again, if there is an issue right now, based on what the FCC is, how they're regulating it, they're saying there isn't. And so all we can do is manage the process based on the rules set forth right now. I don't know really how to answer your question. Is, well, if it turns out they're wrong, what do we do? I don't really know how to answer that question.
Let me take a stab at it. So, Ms. Baird, this is Jeff Warner. I think the accountability for us comes in through our master license agreement, where the city has essentially said that the applicants or the carriers, licensees, what have you, must comply with applicable laws and regulations. So it's really the laws, and those are primarily enforced by the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, that hold them accountable. So the city doesn't regulate or impose fines for labor compliance violations or Cal OSHA violations for our contractors. Those fines and that accountability, lies with the enforcement agencies of the state and of the federal government. So, this agreement is similar to other agreements where we say, hey, or if you're going to come build a building for us or build a road for us, that you need to comply with all applicable laws governing the operation of your business. This is really no different than that, in that they must comply with the laws governing their emissions requirements, their service providing requirements, and so on and so forth. So I think hopefully that answers your question with regards to the accountability. The city also has done what it can to ensure safety for these facilities being adhered to the city's light poles. We've done a lot in requiring these carriers to do structural analysis of the poles and the foundations. And those are certainly things that we can control and have a little bit more effect over. So we've certainly done that with an eye towards safety. I don't think they're too happy with me right now because, I'm asking them to comply with some pretty restrictive, structural calculations and requirements. And again, as a civil engineer, that's certainly in my purview and up my alley. So I hope I've been able to answer your questions there and with regards to accountability.
Well, actually, that makes me feel a lot better that you have like criteria on that. I did ask in the past about the safety with fire and stuff, because of batteries and things that they have, the materials they use. Was any of that addressed in those safety regulations?
They don't.
So I don't think there are any disposable requirements, but certainly our rules do require them to dispose of the equipment properly. If there's any, mishaps with the equipment, or even if perhaps even a car hits one of our streetlight poles and their equipment is damaged, the removal and the disposal of that equipment is put upon the carrier.
Oh, I was more concerned about the fires. Like if there's a fire, like what are the reactions? Like usually they burn long, it's like hot spots.
The small cell equipment, you're concerned about them catching on fire?
I had wondered, I'd read an article about another state one time about it not being able to be extinguished.
We haven't heard that. Now I don't know of any. Jeff, do you know of any batteries? Because these are tied into direct power with SMUD, so there's no batteries.
They might have a battery backup system similar to our traffic controllers, but I'm not aware. I'm not familiar with
we haven't seen any of that, because that was one of the things. We didn't want any equipment on the ground, that's why we asked for a computer rendering saying, show us what this really looks like, show us how big this is, and we confirmed there's nothing on the ground, so we don't know of any battery backup or anything else that might catch fire. We haven't heard of any issues with that. Doesn't mean it wouldn't happen in the future, and we would adjust as, if something happened. So I don't know if that answers your question, or Ms. Barrett?
Not really, but I think it does give me a direction that it's not covered by the city, so.
You can go ahead and follow up with me, Deborah, if you have any more questions. Again, this is Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
If you have my email, certainly send me all your questions. We'll do our best to respond if we're not being clear here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that it, Ms. Baird, or?
Yeah, I'll follow up with Jeff with other questions later.
All right, thank you. All right, so it's 9:01. So that's the 2 hours. It went from 7 to 9, and so we're done with this. Thank you for everybody for participating. We'll follow up as we discussed throughout the meeting on particular issues, and we'll get a copy of this on the city's small cell webpage as quickly as we can. We'll work with our IT department to make sure that happens. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and we'll follow. Have a good evening, and you're welcome to email us with additional questions and concerns, and I'll do our best to answer those. So thank you, everybody.